Celebrating finishing the inventory.
We had a wonderful time once your wife got comfortable on the floor. Me again.
A father fired for fighting for dignity. A mother who died alone from diabetes complications. A star trapped by his own catchphrase. A child who vanished for years. The real story behind Good Times cuts deeper than Dy-no-mite ever let on. John Amos as the father. James Evans Sr., a hardworking father in Chicago projects fighting to lift his family out of poverty through honest work and dignity.
Look here, Junior. If you're making time in the hallway, don't lean up against no doorbells.
For millions of viewers, James Evans represented something television had never shown. A black father who was present, principled, and fighting every day to protect his family. But here's where it gets interesting. John Amos was nothing like the struggling father he played.
Gorgeous hunk of woman here.
I don't know about the gorgeous, but I'm sure a lot of hunk.
Former Denver Broncos player, Colorado State University football star, sociology graduate, Golden Gloves boxing champion. By 1974, he'd already been Gordy the Weatherman on the Mary Tyler Moore Show for 4 years. The man playing the down-on-his-luck project father had more education and athletic achievement than the executives writing his paychecks. Here's what changed everything. John Amos was fired from Good Times after 3 seasons because he kept fighting the writers about how they portrayed black families.
He said, "You want the bad news?" I said, "Sure, how bad can it be?" He said, "You won't be with us." And I said, "Nothing." I didn't say a word.
He wanted real issues, poverty, unemployment, racism, without turning them into cheap laughs. The network told him his services were no longer needed. He'd become a disruptive element. They killed James Evans in a car crash rather than keep Amos around.
We regret to inform you that your husband, James Evans, was killed in an automobile.
But what happened next reveals everything about why Amos fought so hard for dignity. After Good Times, Amos became adult Kunta Kinte in Roots, earning an Emmy nomination and proving he was one of the finest dramatic actors of his generation. Coming to America, Die Hard 2, The West Wing. 50 years of work proving his talent transcended any single role. John Amos died August 21, 2024 at 84. The man fired for wanting to show black dignity spent the rest of his life proving dignity was his to claim. Jimmy Walker as J.J. Evans. Dy-no-mite.
Happy, bright, narrow man and pure dynamite!
2 syllables that launched a career and nearly destroyed a television family. J.J. Evans was supposed to be a minor character, the oldest son with big dreams. But audiences fell for Jimmy Walker's gleaming smile.
And as you know, great artists don't become famous till after they're dead. Personally, I don't think I can wait that long.
And suddenly the serious family show became the JJ Show. The catchphrase became bigger than the character. James Carter Walker Jr., born June 25, 1947, found himself the most famous comedian in America.
You looking at the #1 mama handler in the business.
But here is where the real story begins. Before Good Times, Walker was a radio engineer doing stand-up at night. He opened for The Last Poets, the militant black poetry group, performing raw, political material in Harlem clubs. When David Brenner spotted him, Walker was doing black conscious comedy that had nothing to do with the grinning teenager America would love. Norman Lear transformed him into J.J. Evans, and Time magazine named him Comedian of the Decade. But success came with a brutal price.
I'm gonna leave it up to you, mama. Fix anything you want for my victory dinner.
Walker's co-stars, John Amos and Esther Rolle, went public with their frustration. They felt JJ reinforced negative stereotypes, turning family drama into what they called a minstrel show. The tension was real. The fights were vicious. How does a child who once made millions laugh end up struggling to find work? Walker tried breaking out with Bad Cats and At Ease, but audiences couldn't see past JJ. He returned to clubs, building a second career. But the damage to his relationships with his TV family? That story gets darker than any sitcom episode. The real cost of being typecast reveals itself in how his former co-stars talked about him decades later. In 2026, Jimmy Walker is 78, still touring. The man who was television's biggest star learned that fame can become a prison, unless you're strong enough to break free. Esther Rolle as Florida Evans. Florida Evans, the strong-willed mother holding her family together in Chicago's projects with love, determination, and her signature, damn.
That man always good move, man.
Delivered with perfect comic timing. For 6 seasons, she was the heart of Good Times, making viewers believe love could survive anything. But
Now you ready to tell me about this right now?
James, you don't have to shout.
the actress behind Florida was carrying weight no audience saw. Esther Rolle was born November 8, 1920, making her 54 when she started playing a woman in her 30s. She was actually 19 years older than John Amos. Before Good Times, Rolle was a serious dramatic actress trained at Yale, working with the Negro Ensemble Company, Broadway trained. Maud's dignified housekeeper, a role with intelligence and respect.
I just wonder where he got that voice from. What you mean, where did he get that
Here's what changed everything. Rolle left Good Times after 4 seasons because she couldn't stand what the show became. Like Amos, she was disgusted by JJ and the descent into stereotype. She wanted to show a black family with hope and dignity fighting real obstacles. The network wanted easy laughs. When they refused to give James Evans meaningful work, Rolle walked away from guaranteed money and fame. She returned for the final season, but the damage was done. Rolle battled diabetes for decades, the disease that would kill her. She won an Emmy for Summer of My German Soldier, proving she could act circles around television. But here's what nobody knew about her final years: the isolation, the struggle with typecasting, the physical toll of diabetes while trying to maintain a career in an industry that saw her as just the Good Times mom. Esther Rolle died of diabetes complications November 17, 1998, 9 days after her 78th birthday. The woman who played television's most resilient mother died knowing she'd fought for the right to show black families as they really were. Bernadette Stanis as the daughter. Every black girl in 1970s America wanted to be Thelma Evans. Smart, beautiful, graceful, the daughter who believed education would lift her family out of poverty. The girl who danced to Native New Yorker and became television's first black teen sex symbol. Audiences watched Thelma and saw hope and dreams. The woman who played her understood the crushing weight. But here is what almost nobody knew. Bernadette Stanis was a Juilliard-trained dancer who'd conquered beauty pageants before television. Miss Brooklyn, first runner-up Miss New York. She was only 20 when Good Times premiered, spending her entire young adulthood being watched by girls who saw her as the absolute standard. She embraced the pressure. Everything Thelma did, how she spoke with intelligence, carried herself with grace, demanded respect from boys who chased her, was Stanis consciously showing millions of young black women they deserve dignity. She wasn't just acting, she was modeling. After Good Times, Stanis wrote 4 books, married 4 times, raised 2 daughters while navigating an industry that wanted to typecast her. She appeared in Tyler Perry films, but never again had a role as culturally significant. But there's something about her marriages, her struggles with Hollywood typecasting, and the personal cost of being America's first black teen icon that reveals the true price of breaking barriers. Why does a woman who changed how America saw black teenage girls remain undervalued? Before Thelma, black teen girls were invisible or stereotyped. Stanis made them real. In 2026, Bernadette Stanis is 72, still writing, still carrying herself with the grace that made Thelma unforgettable. Jeanette Dubois as the neighbor. You remember her voice. The Jeffersons theme song? That was Jeanette Dubois singing Movin' On Up. On Good Times, she was Willona Woods, Florida's glamorous best friend with quick wit and big heart who eventually adopted little Penny Gordon. But here is where the real story begins. Jeanette Dubois was Broadway trained long before television fame. Goodman Theater School of Drama graduate. She'd appeared in Golden Boy and A Raisin in the Sun on Broadway. The fashion-conscious neighbor was a serious artist who happened to also be brilliantly funny. Dubois didn't just act on Good Times, she wrote and sang the Jeffersons theme song. When producers needed someone who could deliver energy and optimism, they turned to the woman who understood both music and black storytelling. She composed music for other Norman Lear shows and recorded several albums during her television fame. After Good Times, Dubois kept working steadily, guest roles on dozens of shows, voice work, theater productions. But she never again had a role that let millions of people see her incredible range. Television had decided who she was. The funny neighbor. She spent the next 40 years proving there was so much more to her talent. What happens when a woman who could sing, write, act, and compose gets remembered primarily for making people laugh? Du Bois understood the price of being typecast, but she also understood the value of the work. Willona Woods was groundbreaking, one of the first black women on television allowed to be glamorous, independent, and maternal without being someone's maid or suffering through endless tragedy. But there's something about her final years, her struggles with the industry that never fully recognized her multifaceted talent that nobody talks about. The isolation of being typecast when you know you're capable of so much more. Janae Du Bois died in her sleep February 17, 2020 at 74. The woman who sang about moving on up spent 50 years moving through an industry that never quite knew what to do with her extraordinary talent. Ralph Carter as the activist Michael Evans. 10 years old, but carrying the weight of the civil rights movement in his voice. The militant midget, as his father lovingly called him, who could deliver speeches about black consciousness that would have gotten a grown man in serious trouble. For 6 seasons, Ralph Carter made America listen to truths most television shows were terrified to speak. But here is where it gets interesting. Ralph David Carter was born May 30th, 1961, which means he was actually 13 when Good Times premiered, not the elementary school child he appeared to be. Before television made him famous, Carter was already a Broadway star. Drama Desk Award winner at age 12, Tony nomination at 12. Norman Lear bought out Carter's Broadway contract to get him for Good Times. The radical politics Michael Evans spouted weren't just clever lines written by white writers. Carter grew up in Reverend Herbert Daugherty's congregation, a famous black activist in Brooklyn deeply involved in civil rights. He was surrounded by real revolutionaries fighting for change. When Michael Evans criticized George Washington for owning slaves, Carter was speaking from knowledge most child actors never had. After Good Times, Carter made a shocking choice. He returned to Broadway and released 2 R&B albums, but deliberately stepped back from spotlight that could have made him rich and famous. Instead, he taught at CCNY, wrote 20 children's books, became Audelco Awards vice president. How does a child actor become a teacher and community leader instead of chasing fame? Carter understood something at 18 most people never learn. Success exists to lift others up. The secret about Carter's post-TV life reveals why he chose education over entertainment. In 2026, Ralph Carter is 64 years old, still living in New York, still working in theater and community activism. The boy who preached black consciousness on television never stopped living those principles. Janet Jackson as Penny Gordon. For 2 seasons, from age 11 to 13, Janet Jackson played Penny Gordon, the abused child rescued from violence and adopted by Willona. Audiences watched a traumatized girl learn to trust again. Heartbreaking. Real. The beginning of entertainment history's greatest careers. But here is what nobody understood. Janet was born May 16, 1966, youngest of 10 Jackson children, where show business wasn't a dream, it was survival. Her brothers were the Jackson 5. Joe Jackson was already America's most demanding stage parent. By Good Times, Janet had performed professionally since age 7. The storyline, child escaping abuse, finding safety with loving surrogate mother, wasn't just television for Janet, it was autobiographical. Joe Jackson's emotional abuse was the industry's open secret. Janet called her father by his first name. Fear and anxiety surrounded her childhood. Playing an abused child who finds love may have been Janet's first experience of healing through work. Willona, played by Janae Du Bois, became a surrogate mother on and off camera. The warmth Penny received was something Janet desperately needed. After Good Times, Control, Rhythm Nation, Janet, multiple Grammys, 100 million albums sold worldwide. The abused little girl became one of history's most influential artists. Why does a superstar's early work matter 50 years later? Janet learned that survival stories heal both storyteller and audience. In 2026, Janet Jackson is 59, still creating, still proving the strongest women learn to survive earliest. Johnny Brown as the superintendent. Nathan Bookman, Bookie, the apartment superintendent, showing up at the wrong time with wrong advice. Short, loud, perpetually flustered. Comic relief who made building maintenance hilarious. But Johnny Brown was carrying weight nobody talked about. Born June 11, 1937, Brown was a veteran entertainer by Good Times. 37 years old, working nightclubs and variety shows for decades. Laugh-in regular before Good Times. When the show needed laughs without stealing focus from the Evans family's struggles, Brown understood the assignment. Here's what made Bookman different. Brown never let audiences forget that Bookman was a working man trying to succeed in a system that gave him no tools. His frustration with broken boilers and unpaid bills wasn't just comedy. It reflected people stuck in jobs demanding everything while offering nothing. How does an experienced entertainer get remembered primarily for one supporting role? Brown kept working after Good Times, guest appearances, voice work, films, but never again had a platform showing his range. Johnny Brown died March 2nd, 2022 at 84. The man who made apartment management funny understood that sometimes the best gift is making people laugh while they're crying about their own lives. Ben Powers as the husband. Keith Anderson, the football player who married Thelma in the final season. Tall, handsome, athletic, Thelma's ticket out of the projects. The marriage was supposed to show that love, combined with talent and education, could overcome poverty. But here is where the real story begins. Ben Powers, born July 5th, 1950, was a real athlete before acting. College football player who understood what it meant to be a black man trying to succeed in 1970s sports. When Powers was cast as Keith Anderson, he brought authenticity to the role that audiences could feel. Keith's confidence, his determination, his understanding of how sports could change a life, all came from Powers' lived experience. The storyline that ended Good Times, Keith and Thelma moving to a better apartment, expecting their first child, with Florida coming to live with them to help raise the baby, was supposed to represent the American dream in action. Education plus talent plus hard work equals success. It was the message the show had been building toward for 6 years. After Good Times, Powers continued acting, but never found another role that gave him the same platform. He appeared in films like The Thing with Kurt Russell and guest starred on television shows. But Hollywood seemed unsure what to do with a black actor who was tall, handsome, and athletic, but not comedic. What happens to an actor who represents hope and possibility in a system that doesn't always value those things? Powers kept working, kept trying to find roles that mattered, kept believing the industry would eventually recognize his talent. Ben Powers died April 19th, 2015 at 64 from diabetes complications. The man who played Thelma's husband, the symbol of a better future, died too young from a disease that disproportionately affects Black Americans. The symbolism is heartbreaking and unavoidable. Helen Martin as the elder, weeping Wanda. She showed up to every funeral, every piece of bad news, ready to cry at the drop of a hat. Helen Martin's Wanda Williams was the neighbor who felt everything too deeply, turning grief into performance art. For audiences, Wanda was comic relief. For Helen Martin, she was the culmination of 60 years in show business. But here is where it gets interesting. Helen Dorothy Martin was born July 23, 1909 in St. Louis, Missouri, making her 65 when she first appeared on Good Times. By then, she had already been a Broadway legend for decades. Original member of the American Negro Theater in Harlem, Orson Welles' native son in 1941. The woman playing the weeping neighbor had more Broadway credits than most actors dream of. Martin never married, never had children, devoted her entire life to acting, moving from St. Louis to Chicago to New York to Hollywood, always chasing the next role. Here's what made Wanda Williams different. Martin brought real pathos to the role. When Wanda cried, audiences laughed, but Martin made sure the tears felt real. She understood that comedy and tragedy live in the same neighborhood. After Good Times, Martin became Pearl Shea on 227 and made that legendary Conan O'Brien appearance where she declared, "I love the reefer," and sent audiences into hysterics. Helen Martin died of a heart attack March 25, 2000 at age 90. The woman who made crying funny spent 9 decades proving that laughter and tears are just different ways of being human. Hal Williams as the friend. Willie Washington wasn't a main character, but Hal Williams made him memorable. The friend who showed up in a few episodes, the guy who played pinball with James Evans and offered warnings about life's risks. In Good Times, Willie represented the neighborhood, the men who weren't part of the family but were still part of the story. But here is where the real story begins. Halroy Candace Williams was born December 14, 1938 in Columbus, Ohio, and his path to Hollywood was anything but typical. Postal worker, corrections officer, community theater actor who moved to Los Angeles in 1968 with nothing but determination. By the time Williams appeared on Good Times, he was already building a career that would span 5 decades. Officer Smitty Smith on Sanford and Son, Harley Foster on The Waltons, the man who could do comedy and drama with equal skill, who understood that television success meant being reliable and always ready for the next call. Williams appeared in 3 Good Times episodes playing different characters, a testament to his versatility. But his real achievement was longevity. While other actors struggled with typecasting, Williams built a career on being the dependable guy. From Roots, The Next Generations, to 227 to Guess Who, Williams proved that success isn't always about being the star. Sometimes it's about being the actor everyone wants to work with. In 2026, Hal Williams is 87 years old and still acting. His recent Matlock appearances prove that talent and professionalism never go out of style. So that's the real story behind the Good Times cast then and now. The tragedies and triumphs behind television's groundbreaking first black family sitcom. If you ever wondered what happened to James, Florida, JJ, Thelma, Michael, Walona, Penny, and Bookman after the cameras stopped rolling, now you know the truth nobody talked about for decades. Where They Are in 2026 tells a story about survival and dignity. Jimmy Walker at 78, still touring, still proving talent survives typecasting. Bernadette Stanis at 72, still writing, still carrying herself with the grace that made girls believe they deserved respect.